good afternoon, or good evening, depending on the part of the world that you're in. My name is Luis Fraga. I have the privilege of serving as a professor of political science and director of the Institute for Latino Studies at Notre Dame. We have three incredible panelists today, incredible in terms of their experience, incredible in terms of their perspectives, and especially incredible in terms of their commitment to help us address the continuingly complex issue of, as the title of our panel is, cultural obstacles to immigrant integration and empowerment. We all know that migrant communities, immigrant communities face cultural issues within their own communities in trying to better and best integrate into host societies. But we know perhaps even more deeply that whatever obstacles they face, the obstacles that can be placed by receiving countries, whether in attitude or in practice or in institutional structure, can largely determine how successful those migrants and immigrants are in successfully integrating and especially empowering themselves in their new host society. Today, we're going to take up this issue. I've asked the panelists to speak for about 5 to 7 minutes. Our panelists are, let me introduce them just very, very briefly to you. Our first speaker is going to be Roberta Ricucci, Associate Professor at the University of Turin in Italy. Our second speaker will be Michael Okińczyc-Cruz, Executive Director of the Coalition for Spiritual and Public Leadership in Chicago. And our third speaker is Adrian, I should have asked you how to pronounce your last name. Is it Cristea? Is it Cristea? What's the right pronunciation of your last name, Adrian?
I'll give it a go. Let's see what you come up with.
Okay, I'll say Cristea just because it sounds nice.
Close enough, it's good.
Okay, he's the executive officer of Dublin Sinti Interfaith Forum in Dublin, Ireland. Each of the panelists will open with comments on this general issue for 5 to 7 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions. So please post your questions using the lower bar on your Zoom screen that says Q&A. It's off to the right-hand side, and I will be moderator of those questions and will do my best to keep up with those questions. If I don't get to your question, forgive me, but we'll be able to send these questions to our panelists subsequently, and you can post other questions, as was mentioned at the beginning of our session, either online or send it to any of the panelists individually. So we'll begin with Professor Roberta Ricucci.
Thank you very much. I hope all is okay with the audio.
The audio is good.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for having invited me. It's a great pleasure to join the conversation today. I want to tell something from my perspective as a European and as a scholar living and working in Italy. As you know, it is a relatively recent immigration country, and in the last 5 or 6 years, Italy is at the center of a very huge debate concerning the so-called Mediterranean asylum crisis and so forth. However, I want to give my contribution speaking on the other side of migration, leaving aside asylum seekers or those who are in troubles. Of course, we have to pay attention to this specific subgroup, but according to the conference, I want to focus on those who are really changing the cultural habits, inserting new customs, new traditions to the place where they settle, often through the history of several generations. And as Italian, I can have several things to say according to our history as an immigration country. However, a lot of generation of migrants, also in Italy as well as in other European countries, are developing the social structure of the countries where they are right now. And many elements tell us of Europe as well as Italy that achieve a peaceful and constructive coexistence of intercultural, of fruitful encounter among different points of view, different cultural traditions and ways of doing. However, as explained by those who study the mechanism of news of events, these are issues that do not make headlines. However, their story could be of benefit to citizens in general, from small and large realities, in order to dampen position that are often spoiled by the cliché and stereotypes. And in other words, we have to break down at least those walls built on stereotypes and prejudice. Today, more than yesterday, under the label of migrants or foreigner or non-EU citizens, there are bios, stories of departures and arrivals of different legal conditions, characterized by multiple and sometimes invisible barriers to the full exercise of social, civil, and political rights. Coming to the obstacles to the obstacles which migrants have to cope with during their integration path, I want to stress two main points. On the one hand, considering the host society's perspectives, I want to underline the lack of kind of lifelong learning programs on how both local and national societies have been reshaped by first and second and of course subsequent generation of migrants. We have to develop training activities, civic education programs, not only as it could be immediately envisaged addressed to migrants, but also to all the citizen community, because we have to help citizens to better understand the characteristics and the different living conditions in which migrants are, and to what extent this living condition should change year by year or generation by generation. And this kind of activity that should be developed first through education. So we have to take into account teachers, school managers, and all those personnel that could intervene in developing educational program, both in schools and outside schools, addressing young people, but also their parents, and also those who according to their job position, to take care of migrants and developing news about them. if I have a couple of minutes before.
Yes, you have one left.
Okay, just the last sentences in order to close this first round. I want to stress the necessity to look at the local level in what we are going to develop according our policies. There are, of course, national frameworks, but what is really important is to develop and to try to learn according to the different local cities or local context, what we can improve or what we can manage in the best way for developing a good and hopeful right social inclusion. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Roberta. Michael?
Thank you, Dr. Fraga, and it's good to be with you all today. So I think one of the things that I want to start with is the question of what is a major national obstacle that interferes with the integration of immigrant communities in the United States. Because I think it's important to frame it from that place from the beginning. For me, I think a major factor is the manner in which white supremacy, as an ideology and an ethos in this country, fosters vast and complex forms of racial inequality in the United States, and it has for generations, beginning with the founding of our country. And the way in which this manifests and the manner in which it fundamentally impacts the lives of immigrant communities is that it fundamentally shapes the economic opportunities that are available and more often than not available to immigrant communities. For immigrants to achieve dignified work, wages, and benefits that play a fundamental role in determining their future and their livelihoods in this country. Our educational systems are vastly unequal. Our healthcare systems are, again, vastly unequal. And the manner in which our criminal justice systems and immigration systems detain, pursue, hunt down, if I could use that language, communities of color, and immigrant communities being entangled in this mess is something that we're seeing, and it's crippling to communities who are arriving in this country and who are making this country their home. So I want to start there because I think this vast system of inequality, of racism, of xenophobia has such a profound role in the way in which it impacts immigrant communities in the 21st century in our present day. And this has been true for many, 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 many years in this country. I think to then go towards the second point that I would like to make, which is what are the cultural obstacles that impact integration? I want to frame it in a slightly different way as I've thought about this, and that's that integration is important. My great-grandparents came from Guanajuato, Mexico, to the United States during the Mexican Revolution, and they moved to Kansas, and they worked on the railroads, and then they moved to California during the Great Depression. My father, who's a refugee from Poland, he came during the Solidarity movement. He came as a refugee. He stayed at a refugee camp in Latino, Italy, outside of the Vatican City, and he was there for about 6 months. And it was during this time that he met John Paul II. And I like to joke that for Polish Catholics, there's a hierarchy. There's John Paul II, and then there's Jesus, and then there's everybody else. And so this was a very important moment, for my father. But the immigrant story is a story that's intimately connected to my story. But I think for immigrants today, integration is one aspect. But a more self-determinant aspect is the way in which immigrants are called to influence and shape this country. I think particularly for immigrants that are coming from Latin American, Middle Eastern, African, and Asian nations, because they're encountering a vast system of inequality that's grounded in racist and xenophobic policies most often. And so for them to take a more aggressive approach to say, we are here not only to accept or assimilate, but in fact to help shape and reconstitute this country into one that is far more welcoming, far more just, and far more humane. And I think that's the role that immigrants are called to play in our country, which is a profoundly difficult role considering our current political context, in which politics of racism and xenophobia have garnered great political power for those in political power these days. And so what I want to say about the cultural obstacle is that if immigrant communities are going to play a role in fundamentally reshaping this country, they've got to form alliances. And I think one of the great cultural benefits, you know, being the descendant of immigrants myself, is that when immigrants come to this country, whether they're from Latin America, whether they're from other parts of the world, they oftentimes associate with people from their own culture. And that's a beautiful thing. You know, my wife is from a community called La Vita, Little Village in Chicago. It's about 99% Mexicana, Mexicano. It's a beautiful thing. And so for many immigrant populations, associating with one's culture is vital. It offers continuity, it offers support, it offers familiarity. But one of the things that this conversely inhibits is oftentimes the willingness for immigrant communities to form alliances with other immigrant communities. I worked in Buffalo for 5 years, and Buffalo at the time had one of the largest refugee populations on a per capita basis in the country. So you had refugees from all over the world, and they lived in the same neighborhoods and the same zip codes, but often they would only associate with people from their own culture. And yet the educational system there was vastly unequal. The economic opportunities were vastly unequal. And what we did through the work that I was a part of in Buffalo is we began to organize. And we began to organize refugee communities, and we began to say, yes, you've got to organize your own community. But unless you're willing to organize with other refugee communities, we're not going to be able to build the type of political, social, economic power that's going to enable you to pursue the interests, the policies, the changes in this community that are going to be good for you and your children. So we've got to find ways to work together. And so that natural impulse to associate with one's own culture and community is beautiful, it's rich, but we've got to overcome it in terms of identifying other communities that we have common interest with and that we can organize with. And so I think it's both a blessing, and sometimes it's something that we've got to overcome. And I've seen this in my work. I think that if immigrant communities are going to achieve the type of lives that they envision for themselves and their families, there's got to be a robust commitment to civic engagement, democratic participation, and solidarity and alliance building amongst other immigrant communities.
Thank you very much, Michael. Adrian? I think you have to unmute your microphone. There you go. Thank you, Michael.
Just did. Thank you, Luis. I'm delighted to be with you this afternoon, and greetings from Dublin, Ireland. It's a beautiful evening here, so it's something unusual, I have to say. But before I start, I just want to thank Father Bob Dowd for his kind invitation to join the conference. And after reflecting on the topic that I was asked to speak, I realized that it's quite complex and multi-layered, and there no doubt that there is this you know, whatever reflections we'll have after this, there'll be just as many questions as well. I'm going to try and share some insights from our work here in Ireland, and how we at Dublin City Interfaith Forum use interfaith work, interfaith engagement in trying to address these challenges that we are now facing. We're trying to work in partnership, we're establishing dialogue, promoting interfaith respect and understanding of our cultural and religious backgrounds. Conversations about interfaith and integration are both enlightening and challenging. As the face of our cities and community communities change, so does the range of our faith communities, and the importance of developing a society that's cohesive, that understands and acknowledges and respects its different parts. We're working to develop better understanding, relationships of deeper respect and acceptance of each other as human beings. Meetings, conversations, and building relationships of mutual respect and trust with people from different faith traditions are important, but they're more urgent in our contemporary context. As leaders of our different organizations, we work to strengthen efforts to improve religious knowledge and understanding. This will help to challenge people who act out of prejudice and misunderstanding and sometimes engage in destructive behavior. As faith communities, we're committed to values of hospitality, justice, mercy, peacemaking, and our meetings that we hold on a regular basis have brought us to a stage where we can have this conversation in a space that is safe, and we can discuss almost everything. Some of the challenges mentioned earlier, and coming across them, sorry, I just lost my chain of thought for a second. I'll come back to it. But along the obstacles mentioned here, some of them include mistrust between different groups. That sometimes is caused by lack of meaningful integration between groups. The religious illiteracy, given the fact that diversity is something new for us in our own context. The lack of knowledge and understanding even about our own faith and other people's faiths and cultures. Among other challenges, we have to take into account combating of terrorism, fighting against poverty and social exclusion, democratic rights and liberties, and the solidarity across generations. That's something that comes across as well. Through the work that we do in the interfaith arena, if we could harness the resources that all our faith traditions offer, problems such as racial and religious prejudice can be alleviated or perhaps even overcome. For example, what can be more potent in countering prejudice than the genuine, heartfelt conviction that we all share a common humanity? We know that there is still a need to come to know our neighbors at the deepest level, at spiritual level. This sharing, this deep sharing is important for all people, but it's especially important for people whose spiritual nurture comes from other parts of the world. There are people to whom their faith dominates their whole life. In fact, their life revolves around their faith. So you come to the conclusion that you have to respect the person for what he or she is. You respect them because they are good Muslims, Sikhs, Hindus, Baha'is, not just because they're good Christians. You welcome people from India, Pakistan, Malaysia, and you realize that they have a richness that they can share with us. When we meet together, we find that we have so much in common, and we know that our faiths are not the same. We can learn to respect one another because of the differences that we discover together. And by doing this, we build a much happier set of relationships within our own city, and we can make sure that Christianity, because Ireland in our context is a Christian country by historically speaking, we make sure that Christianity can be better understood by the others. A Hindu friend once remarked to me that Christianity was a beautiful religion. Her regret was that she could not see it. Even if we don't mean it, we are color prejudiced. We won't overcome this prejudice until we wake up to the fact that it is there, and we admit how prejudiced we are. Just to conclude here, I just want to say from my own experience, I feel privileged that I had the opportunity to learn from the teaching from so many friends around the Interfaith Forum over the years, to get a better understanding of other cultures, faith traditions, and I'm really grateful to them for such a beautiful and precious gift. So I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Thank you to all of you for your tremendous insights and for keeping to time and for being willing to engage with questions that will come from the audience. I have a question to kick us off, and it's anyone can address it, and several of you can address it at the same time. One of the things we've learned about immigrant integration and the challenges of immigrant integration is that there can sometimes be regional variation, national, provincial, local, national, state, local variation within any one country. And some communities react differently than other communities. What's your recommendation as to how we need to distinguish between what may be happening at the national level in a country and what may actually be happening on the ground, in a neighborhood, in a city, in a school system, in a community-based organization or a set of community-based organizations, to better understand these challenges of immigrant integration? Let me put it this way. Sometimes our national efforts seem very anti-immigrant. Certainly we've seen a move to the right across Europe and certainly in the United States. But there always seem to be some smaller communities of tremendous creativity, understanding, hope, and ideally love, where people are trying to understand one another as humans, as was said. How do you balance that? when you have both existing simultaneously? How do you personally balance that in your own understanding of your work?
So let me start first.
Thank you,
So,
Roberta.
First of all, I think that looking at the local level, one suggestion is to share projects, initiatives, and policies. There is a huge amount of activities comparing city by city and taking account to what extent the different ethnic communities can be involved at the local level in their in the city life or in the different and various associations developed not only within their own community, but also developed by intercultural association or at least by the same local institutions in order to promote immigrants' visibility, in order to involve their point of view. However, we have to admit sometimes in a kind of consultative way, not in a more inclusive and in the so-called making decision process. But what we can learn looking at several projects, if I pay attention to what is happening in Italy right now in several local contexts, there are a lot of outcomes and findings that we can use in order to try to learn from each other and try to overcome those challenges that we can think are only peculiar of one community or another. One of the best examples concern interaction with Muslims, both with first and second generations. A lot of attention has been devoted to involve them in the city associations, in helping them in showing to what extent and at what conditions Islam can be really acceptable in our society. And they develop several good initiatives and several good examples of interaction with local host communities as well as with other immigrant communities. But what is happening is that some scholars first, and then some policymakers, or then some association leader or a member of advocacy coalition used to say, oh, don't bear in mind about this project. They are strongly focused on Muslims. No, or not at all. They could be reused, of course, maybe updated and or reshaped according to the needs of other ethnic communities or other local communities in order to improve social cohesion and inclusiveness.
Thank you very much, Roberta. Michael or Adrian, would you like to make a comment? If not, we have a question from our audience.
Maybe just to follow on from what Roberta was saying, I think it's important to look at the local level, promote and share the good practices, and if we have this, I suppose this gap that you mentioned between the local level and the national level, is to try and influence as much as possible changes that would lead to improving or addressing the gap, basically change what's happening at the national level. We're part, within the EU, we have a legislative framework there that we're all bound to it's what we call the common EU policy, and that sets a basic level of support that all EU countries are supposed to offer in terms of integrating migrants and ensure that all the EU members have a migrant integration strategy. But all EU countries are at different levels in implementing that policy. So it's obvious that what you mentioned, we all see it. We have very good practices at local level, but overall at national level, that there may be issues. So using good examples at local level is one way of sharing good practice and encouraging good policies to be developed, rolled on a wider format.
Michael?
Yeah, I would only add that the civic engagement, the democratic participation of immigrant and refugee communities in the U.S. and local communities is essential. It's essential to providing a pathway in which immigrant and refugee populations can and should make a fundamental impact on their neighborhoods and on their communities and in their cities. One example that I can think about is from the time I spent in Buffalo. Obviously, I'm now in Chicago with the Coalition for Spiritual and Public Leadership. But previously to that, one of the issues that we worked on with refugee and immigrant communities was that the local high school in Buffalo that was right in the middle of this incredibly diverse refugee community. This school had 46 different languages spoken amongst the student population. So thinking about how remarkably diverse the community is, it's staggering. I mean, the richness and the beauty of it. Yet that high school had one bilingual teacher amongst all the staff. That is an example of a critical issue that local families, local immigrant communities can begin to organize around to address. And I do think, and I've seen this, that participation in civic organizations, faith-based organizations, community organizations that foster the development of civic skills and qualities does and can have an impact on national politics. But it's got to start somewhere. And in my experience, starting local is always a good place to start, because it enables communities to address those fundamental issues that have a direct impact on their lives. And that's not to say that national politics don't. They certainly do. We've got to pay attention to both. But I often feel like the narratives and all of the attention that's paid to national politics, which frankly can be overwhelming in our country these days, can distract us from doing our part on a local level and in fact inform our national politics more adequately.
Thank you very much, Michael. We have a question from one of our participants. This is for Adrian, but perhaps for Michael and Roberta as well. Does the space for conversation that your organization has nourished include non-immigrants, that is, citizens? And if it has, what is one of the most difficult expressions of prejudice that these spaces have helped address? Adrian?
Yes, is the short answer. Our forum is, I suppose, our forum is it's very diverse, but it includes members of the resident faith communities, because right from the start, we wanted to build those bridges between the resident communities and the newer communities, create a deeper understanding between the newer faith traditions and the residents. So, for example, we have you know, a diverse number of Christian denominations that are resident, who share the same space when we meet with the newer faith communities: Muslim, Sikh, Hindu, Jewish, Baha'i. We visit each other's places. We work on projects together, and we work together with the state agencies, for instance, to create again a better understanding of you know, diversity of culture, diversity of religion. Make it easier for service providers to understand and relate to the needs of the newer communities. So it's a space that is all inclusive. We have people who have no religion that attend our events, and which is fine, you know, because we're all learning. It's been such a learning curve all these years, where fear, prejudice, misunderstanding is addressed in a very informal way. We have events where, for instance, we bring all cultures together, and through arts, music, dance, different types of cuisines from around the world, they certainly break all the prejudices and stereotypes and create a space where everybody's comfortable. I'm not sure if it answered your question, but basically we're trying to make the space as inclusive as possible.
Wonderful. Thank you, Adrian. Michael or Roberta, would you like to respond?
Yes. First, I used to train teachers, social workers, in addition to my students. And one of the crucial points is the fact that they use to think migrants in a kind of fixed image dated back at the end of 80s or at the beginning of 90s. And they are not interested in updating any kind of their information about migrants. So all migrants, both men and women are only involved in the so-called dirty, dangerous, and demanding jobs, and they cannot imagine, or they fear about the competition in the labor market for either job position. They don't use to think about, okay, now in Italy, for example, we are celebrating around 50 years of immigration. So it's not a novelty dealing with migrants or exchanging habits with people coming from other countries. But for several citizens, and to me is particularly dangerous that for those who play key roles in education, in managing social services, they still continue to have stereotypes coming from not updating image. And this also occurred when you speak about Muslims, as well as Catholics or Orthodox coming from abroad. All these migrants, from the religious point of view, are strong believers. It's quite unbelievable to think that, okay, even among Muslims or among Catholics coming from Philippines or from Latin America, they could change their religious behavior. Some of them maybe used to become a stronger religious believer, but maybe several of them could decide to move away from their Catholic or their religious associations, or update their religious behavior in a more secular way, or according to what mentioned Adrian before, maybe there is the possibility that they are atheists or agnostics. Why not? But according to the stereotypes, specifically, of course, and principally among Muslims, okay, they are all strong believers, and we have to take really in account this specific religious behavior.
Thank you, Roberta. Michael?
So I think, my response to this question is that, that through my work at the Coalition for Spiritual and Public Leadership, we are a diverse organization of different immigrant communities and non-immigrant communities. We prioritize essentially the voice and leadership of those who are most impacted by the policies that foster inequality in our communities, in our country. But at the same time, the kind of collective learning that takes place when different communities are able to work together and to reflect critically on both the issues and the solutions. It fosters opportunities for shared learning, but also for people who've held preconceived notions and ideas that perhaps are rooted in false ideas, and either xenophobic or racist ideas. It oftentimes, the opportunity to work together towards just and fair solutions encourages people to think more deeply, more critically about some of the assumptions they've made, and perhaps about why communities have struggled despite all of our ideas about equal opportunity in this country. That perhaps all opportunities are not equal, and that there's barriers in place that particular communities are having to overcome. And so I think that the work, especially civic engagement work, community organizing work, as I've seen it, does indeed create an environment in which collective learning is possible, but also where many of the false ideas that people have about how immigrants should live and why immigrant communities perhaps aren't achieving this idealistic American dream that we've set out for ourselves in this country, that there's a lot beneath the surface that we need to unpack and unravel for people. And so I've seen this happen oftentimes in the work that I've been a part of over the years.
Thank you, Michael. We have another question from our participants, one of our participants. Many recently arrived immigrants often end up adapting to the political ideologies, let's say dominant political ideologies surrounding them, sometimes against their own self-interest. What sort of education, formation might accompany integration efforts so that the newly arrived do not further internalize and support narratives that damage them in their communities? And do you see this phenomenon often in your settings? Any one of you?
I would say yes, I do. And it's very painful to see. I think that, you know, many children of immigrants that I come across speak about dynamics within their household in which a parent of theirs who was an immigrant, who came to this country, that their ideas about immigration have been profoundly shaped and influenced by our current political rhetoric in our country, particularly from the conservative side of the political spectrum. And it's very painful. It's very painful for many kids of immigrant, within immigrant households to see this and even to try to understand it. And I think much of this is tied to, you know, the psychological violence, the spiritual violence of assimilation, in which, especially for immigrants coming from countries that have been colonized or that have experienced ongoing war and exploitation by global superpowers, the narrative that immigrant communities often receive, especially if they're not white or European, is that they're less than in this country. And that assimilation oftentimes convinces people that they have to strive towards this perfect image of what it means to be an American in the United States. And I think that that often has fostered internal oppression in immigrant communities. An anti-immigrant sentiment towards other immigrants, new arrivals, that anti-immigrant sentiment coming from those who at one point in their life were recent arrivals in this country, I think is a manifestation of how assimilation can be profoundly harmful internally on a psychological and spiritual level within immigrant communities. And how the ideologies, the political ideologies, the narratives in this country that we tell ourselves foster this kind of environment in which immigrants see other newly arriving immigrants as less than, as undeserving, based on the narratives that we see in our political spectrum. The other thing that I think is important in terms of the education and formation is that we've got to, and I keep coming back to this, the involvement of immigrant communities in the political process, in their civic communities, is so profoundly important. And there's a big difference because we oftentimes talk about it, and I see it in the Catholic Church. We talk about being activists for those who don't have a voice for the voiceless. To me, that is a fallacy. Everybody has an opportunity to have their own voice. Everybody has their own voice. And for communities, there's got to be a level of self-determination, collective determination in impacting their communities and their future to make them better. Otherwise, a great deal of resentment and disappointment sets in for immigrants who came here expecting one thing and having to endure years and years and years of racism and inequality in this country, and looking back at their lives when they're 60, 70, 80 years old and saying, I'm disappointed in the way that my life turned out, but not being able to really critically look at the systemic reasons as to why they never gained financial stability, or they never achieved the type of career path, or their family's not in a position economically that they had hoped for when they moved to this country from, say, Mexico or Iraq. And so I think that there's a lot in place, but the civic engagement that I believe is essential for immigrant communities should be rooted in popular education, should be rooted in a philosophy in which immigrants themselves should and can be at the center of self-determination, collective determination, impacting their communities, not being treated as if their lives, their livelihoods have to be determined by others, but they in fact can organize to help shape the future for them and their families and their loved ones.
Thank you, Michael. This is a question from another participant that I'm going to ask either Adrian or Roberta, I'm just trying to get through the questions, to respond to. It goes as follows. At times at the Catholic parish level, there are initiatives to bring diverse communities together. However, through these initiatives, there's a perception to welcome the immigrant, integrating them so that all communities can share in one language, English, and in one culture, which in turn risks the culture and tradition that immigrants bring to the table and how they practice their faith, pushing it to fade away. How do we distinguish between assimilation and integration and utilize an appropriate distinction to welcome the immigrant while embracing what they have to offer? Adrian or Roberta?
Let me start. I think that following what Michael mentioned in the first round, both ethnic communities and Catholic parishes should develop partnership and a way of working together. Because sometimes we forget that the insertion of Catholics coming from different Catholic countries could enter the parish with different religious habits or different ways of thinking about religiousness. I can mention an example that I use during my lessons with my students. Italy, as you may know, experience huge flows of internal migration during the 50s and the 60s in the last centuries. And I used to say to the students, think what could be the shock when a Catholic believer living in the northern west of Italy, where being a believer meant being silent at church, or living his or her religiousness privately, without showing in the square or in the street religious habit, and so on and so forth. What kind of shock when this kind of believer met a completely different way of interacting with God, or using religious behavior in the daily life. So we have to learn each other within, in the same, under the same umbrella of Catholicism, and in doing this, we have to cooperate or develop strategic activities involving both ethnic, religious communities and local Catholic, in this example, parish. But we can go ahead mentioning other example involving Muslims. It's not so easy to develop positive interaction among different Muslim communities living in the same cities, and maybe organize separately musallas or Muslim associations. And again, the key element to me is to promote and stress at each level information and training sessions in order to better describe, but not in a top-down way, but from the grassroots, who migrants are and what kind of experience they have, and to what extent they can benefit from the interaction, and they can be useful and, of course, culturally enriched in the new society.
Thank you very much, Roberta. As we begin to wind down our panel, I want to ask each of our panelists to take 3 minutes to give us any final thoughts. Anything that you'd like to say that you didn't have the opportunity to say, and especially anything that you have to say that might help all of us here understand our responsibilities to try to take action, to try to do something different in our lives and in our work, to be able to greater facilitate the integration and advancement of migrant and immigrant communities in our respective countries. And I'll start with Adrian, and then we'll go to Roberta, and then we'll go to Michael. Adrian, 3 minutes.
Oh, you're very generous, Luis. Thank you. I wanted to add something on a question that was asked before, but I didn't get an opportunity around the political ideology and the I suppose the impact it could have on migrant integration. In our experience, we found out that many recently arrived immigrants, for them, a political affiliation, a political perspective is perhaps the last on their priorities. We find out that the interest in political activity is quite low, and we know this you know, is detrimental further on. We've had a number of programs where we try to encourage people to participate in local elections and exercise their democratic rights. We had programs encouraging people and trying to educate to use their votes. In Ireland, asylum seekers can vote at local level. Practically everybody can vote at local level, and then there's I suppose it's based on status. But to finalize on our topic here, I think you know, the more we encourage people from different backgrounds, from different cultures, from different traditions to come together, the more we create those spaces where experiences can be shared, where people can learn from each other, can talk to each other, can become friends. I mean, we notice now after all these years in having a diverse group together, meeting regularly, most of us have become friends. We can talk about almost anything. We can discuss almost anything. Roberta mentioned it's difficult to bring, you know, subgroups of different faith traditions together. On our forum, we have, I suppose, Sunni, Shia, Sufi. You know, we have representatives from 5 different branches of Islam in the same space, visiting each other's mosques. We had an event 2 days ago, 3 days ago on Monday, celebrating the International Day of Peace, where everybody came together and express their reflections and their support, and it was wonderful to see everybody together. Tomorrow we're going to, it's all online, obviously, because of the situation that we have. We're going to the Hindu community to celebrate Gandhi's Day, and on Sunday, the Shia community marks Ashura, which is Muharram, the Imam Hussein's martyrdom, and we're all there. So you know, having this space is invaluable, because the image that it relays and the message that it conveys to the wider community is of such importance.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Roberta, final thought and call to action.
Yeah, a couple of bullet points. First, from the host society points of view, try to involve all generations in their activities, developed first locally, but also at the regional level. And when I mention all generations, I would to recall young people, but also adults and elderly people, because the last group could be run the risk to be strongly embedded in their own communities without any contacts or less contacts with the society around them as a whole. Second, improve the knowledge of each migrant communities among all the migrant communities. There are a lot of stereotypes within and towards the different ethnic communities. It is quite unbelievable that after several decades of studies and action on these topics, we are still listen people who divide the local residents between local, let me say, citizens and migrants. Does not exist the unique group of migrants. There are several communities with various traits, differences within them, and of course stereotypes and prejudice. So we have to learn such differences and take into account them. And last but I think that it is really important. We have to develop a kind of learning by sharing attitude. In several projects or initiatives, findings or the so-called best practices are a kind of treasure that we cannot want to share to others. No, we have to share in order to improve what we can do in a positive way and avoid the risk to fail and to miss some opportunities.
Thank you very much, Roberta. Michael?
Yeah, first, thank you to all the panelists and everybody here today watching. I think I would conclude by saying that that within the United States, there have been moments in this country's long history in which the country has taken steps forward towards addressing the fundamental issues that impact immigrant communities, African Americans, Latino populations, Native American communities. But this has only come as a result of these communities taking the bold courageous and necessary steps towards working to reshape many of the laws, policies, and ideas that for generations have and continue to, in many ways, oppress these communities. So that's to say that civic and political education, relationship building and solidarity building, and grassroots civic engagement and community organizing are all urgently necessary. That given the current political climate in our country, the way that that's manifested in our national politics, it is fundamentally important that immigrants who are arriving in this country see that they have a fundamental role to play in engaging in their neighborhoods and their communities, and that they are also called to reshape the way that the future of this country, to make it into one that is far more welcoming, that's far more fair, that's far more equitable, that's far more loving, and that's far more just. And on a practical level, for those who are here with us today, who are involved at their parish or at a university, you know, parishes and universities for years have played a part in local community organizing and civic efforts. You know, I have the opportunity to work with Luis through my work at CSPL, but parishes and universities can and should indeed play a part in working with faith-based or community-based civic organizations that promote grassroots leadership development and civic engagement. And so there's history and evidence of this across the country in just about every state and every city in this country, of parishes and universities working with grassroots-led community organizations to effect change, to promote education, to promote relationship building across cultures and traditions, and to promote solidarity and value sharing and solution seeking that gets to the heart of many of the issues that immigrant communities in this country are facing these days. So those are the last thoughts I would share with you all today.
Thank you very much, Michael. Well, we've reached the end of our time. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you can attend the rest of the conference. You can find the conference schedule and the links to join each session at an address that I'm not going to read because it's a little complicated. But I want to give my personal thanks to our panelists, Adrian Cristea, Roberta Ricucci, and Michael Okińczyc-Cruz, for taking the time to be with us, but more importantly, for sharing your insights with us. And if there's a final thought that I might offer, building upon all of the excellent comments made by our panelists, is that we all have an obligation to be open to learning, and that openness to learning, to thinking differently, to understanding different cultures, to understanding different religions, that openness is ultimately what leads to deeper understanding, and that deeper understanding of us, and especially our common destiny, the way in which our communities' futures are linked to one another, is key to our being able to increase our capacity to love in the purest sense, and in the way that so many different religious traditions give us the opportunity to do, if we take advantage of that opportunity. Thank you again. Thank you to the conference. Thank you to the conference organizers. Thank you to everyone who's behind the scenes, but especially thank you to Adrian, Roberta, and Michael.